Let's just make sure it works.
Sister's place.
Okay, good.
So it's scheduled. Boom, boom.
Okay. Okay, so good evening, everybody. And perhaps if you're watching at home, you may be smarter than having come out this evening, but it's not such a big deal for us used to.
Joy of seeing you in person.
We missed the ice. If there was ice, nobody would be here.
Right. So I put on the chat on the side, I just assumed that people were able to type questions if they had any questions. But apparently it doesn't necessarily work. So if it doesn't work for you, then if you're watching live, only if you're watching live. This does not count if you're watching after the fact. You can email me your question, and I'll have access to my email. So I just wanted to rehash just briefly what we did last time. Oh, see, it does work. Somebody just wrote that they are there. Good. So I don't know why it didn't work for some. Okay. So last time in this to provide some background and context to the idea of imagining God with disabilities. First, I wanted to get across the idea that that from the Torah and the Bible, we do not have an explanation of theology. Events are just recorded as is, assuming that we understand already that God exists. And we understand that from the very first sentence of the Bible. Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So who is God? Who created God? Did God pre-exist everything before? Have no idea. We don't have the answers to these questions in the Torah itself. And then also when biblical characters find God and have a relationship with God, there also isn't a sense of them going to theology school first or having some other experience in life that made them say, oh, I believe in God. So in other words, what I'm thinking of at that instance, as I just said this, is Paul in Christian tradition was Saul of Tarsus and had a revelatory moment on his way, and as a result of that became a devoted follower of Jesus. So there is no such situation in the Torah. The people are just associated with God. God talks to Abraham and Sarah, but it's as if he had talked to them before. Because all of a sudden he says to them in the Torah, get up from your homeland and go to the land I'm going to show you. But he's 75 years old at the time.
You talked to Sarah too?
Well, we'll make it egalitarian that he talked to Sarah also. But yes, in the Torah, literally it says that he talked to Abraham. But we assume that the matriarchs had a relationship with God too, and the rabbis in the Midrash say that the matriarchs did have a full relationship with God too. So the point number one is that there is no theology in the Torah. The theology comes from studying the Torah, studying how God appears in the Torah and is depicted in the Torah, from rabbis in their commentaries and scholars over the centuries. Point number one. Point number two is God is depicted and pictured in a variety of ways in the Bible as well. So that we see God, as we talked about last time, we see God as lawgiver with the giving of the Ten Commandments. We see God as warrior with helping the Israelites cross the sea and defeating the Egyptian army that was pursuing them. We see God as creator in chapter 1 of Genesis. So we depict God, or God is depicted and characterized in a number of ways. Who does the characterization? That's a question that really I wanted to talk about today, and then which leads into this understanding that we can imagine God with disabilities as well. So it seems in the Torah that it seems pretty obvious from whatever story is presented that that's how we understand God in that story. So it's not a stretch to say that perhaps it was the perception of the people or the person surrounding that particular event which led to a major characterization of God in that event. So, for example, the experience of the Israelites in crossing the sea and being so miraculous that they were able to do that, and then the Egyptian army dying and drowning in the sea, seems to be that it would be natural for the people to ascribe those events to God. And that God would be depicted then as a warrior because that's how God seems in that event. So if we carry that forward to events of the last century, that when the state of Israel was established in 1948, and then in 1949 an armistice agreement was reached with the attacking Arab armies, so that the state of Israel then was no longer at war, one could react to that either militarily, politically, strategically, that all the alliances worked out, and that the Jewish army, the Haganah, was well prepared, and they were able to defeat a boastful, arrogant Arab army. That could be one way, a non-religious way of depicting that event. Or if one had a religious bent, a spiritual bent about them, they would say that God must have been involved in the events of 1948 to allow the 600,000 Jews who were living in Israel at the time to be able to defeat the more so-called well-trained armies of the surrounding Arab countries. So if you could either see it as a miraculous event, you could see it as God being involved or not. So I would say the same thing about events in the Torah. Okay, so that this might not be an opinion that would be accepted by all streams in Judaism, but there are many who do believe, and within conservative Judaism as well, that there is human authorship of the Torah, or at least human participation with God in authorship of the Torah. And if that's the case, then there's going to be human depiction of God, as opposed to God giving the Torah and saying, this is who I am, based on the stories that you read here. Okay? So essentially what I'm saying is that what we have in the Torah and the Bible is human expression, understanding, perception of what God is, as opposed to God telling people what God is. Okay? So thoughts or questions before we go on about that? Okay. Yes. Human-like characteristics, Adriana is saying, because humans wrote the book. So, in other words, what is God's language? We have no idea what God's language is, but the rabbis from centuries ago said, Dibra Torah Bilshon B'nei Adam, the Torah was spoken in human language. And so that we could understand what God wants of us. But I carry that forward, not me, but the conservative movement carries that forward by saying that, okay, if we want to see that the Torah comes from God, I understand that either God dictated the Torah to Moses, so therefore Moses wrote it down, and therefore there already is human involvement in the writing of the text, or it was written over a period of time from people in different, like the people at Mount Sinai reacting to and responding to some kind of experience that they had. And perhaps there was some kind of experience they had in Egypt, and they're responding to that as well. So they respond to the fact that they recognize there is a God, And then they respond by saying, this is what we need to do to show that we believe in God in our lives. We have this system of law now by which we can base our society, by which we can find spiritual moments in our lives every day. Okay, so that is how the conservative movement understands the Torah itself and understands these depictions of God. So if we have those three and many others of God as creator, God as warrior, God as lawgiver, God depicted in many other human terms, then I think that leads to, as Dr. Ora Horn Prauser taught in this class, from which I'm basing this class on a few weeks ago at a conference, then it would be appropriate as well to think about God with disabilities. So I wanted to look at a very popular psalm and understand that psalm in the way that we normally understand it, and then put a little twist on it. So that's why I asked you to have your prayer book with you, and I want us to turn to page 97 in the Siddur, and this is the Siddur I'm using here, but it's Psalm 23. So whatever edition of the Bible or the prayer book you have at home, you can or Google Psalm 23. And it's a pretty straightforward translation. No matter which edition of the Bible you're using, it's essentially the same thing. So Psalm 23, we're all familiar with, especially those of us who have attended funerals, know this psalm pretty well. So I'm going to read it out loud. It's a short psalm, a psalm of David. Adonai, so our translation doesn't translate God's name as Adonai. Usually it's the Lord. So we might be familiar with the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God gives me repose in green meadows and guides me over calm waters. So it's a little bit more modern than the older translation that we might be used to. God will revive my spirit and direct me on the right path, for that is God's way. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are at my side. Your staff and your rod comfort me. You prepare a banquet for me in the presence of my foes. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and kindness shall be my portion all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai, or the house of the Lord, forever. Okay, so what is this psalm talking about? What is going on in the life of the person writing this psalm at this moment?
I guess he was going into a big battle.
Oh, perhaps the person's going into a big battle. Why are you saying that, Saul?
Because it's David. He was a warrior.
Okay.
And he knew at any time he went in, he could get killed.
Okay. So for Saul, the idea is that because it's David, a psalm of David, that David was a warrior, fought a lot of battles in finishing the conquest of the land of Israel. And at any moment, any one of those battles, David could have been killed. So that perhaps that's the valley of the shadow of death. So there's a fear there that is expressed here by David. Okay. What else comes to mind when you read this psalm? Peggy.
It's just that every day is important, that any minute any one of us could pass. Right. And to appreciate every day.
All right, so Peggy is suggesting that every moment is valuable, every day is valuable, and our time could end at any moment, and we should appreciate life. So what are the hints in this psalm that leads you to say that, Peggy?
Where it says, God will revive my spirit and direct me on the right path.
Okay.
So that's God's way.
Okay.
Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are
at my side. Okay, so walking through life itself is a walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you're suggesting, Peggy. And therefore, by knowing that God is on our side, then we have a little bit of comfort that we're protected in some way, or whatever happens to us, we know who to turn to for support. Okay, what else comes to mind from Adriana? Shepherd and flocks. Okay, so what's there? There's the image of the psalm starts with the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And so, yes, so what is that image supposed to do for us? You see, think of Kol Nidre. Okay, so there's the Unatana Tokef prayer, in which we are, that's also Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in which we picture ourselves as a flock of sheep passing before God to be counted, right? And so it's not necessarily in the Kol Nidre prayer, but there are other images like that throughout the high holidays in which we are sheep. So what are sheep? Why is God the shepherd and therefore we are the sheep? So sheep are followers. Do sheep have a mind of their own? Not, well, they just want to eat. Okay, so they might wander in the pasture, and what's the shepherd's job? To guide them, and then when it's time to go home, to bring them back together and say, let's go home. Okay, so the shepherd's supposed to take care of the flock, right? And so then I think of the Bugs Bunny cartoons, right, where, you got the wolf. Somebody's dressed up as a wolf trying to eat a sheep, right? I don't know. I guess this image isn't resonating with all of you, but I remember these cartoons. So that's what the shepherd's supposed to protect the sheep from wolves and other dangerous animals that might be out there. And the sheep, I don't know if sheep had minds in which they're thinking. They get used to the shepherd and they trust the shepherd, that the shepherd's going to take them to a place where they can eat and where they can drink, and they'll take them home, and they'll be safe overnight. Okay, so why is the psalmist using? Since people are not sheep, what is the image then that the psalmist is trying to get across here? Whether it's David or somebody else who's writing the psalm, what's the?
You can depend upon him to help you when you need help.
Right. So possibly the idea of we are sheep and God is shepherd is that we can depend on God when we need God for help. Okay? That's certainly an image here. And why is it associated with funerals? The psalm is mostly associated with funerals. Why, of all times in life? Is this a traditional psalm it's universally recited at funerals? Okay, so certainly the literal words, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, is in here. In Hebrew, the word is psalmavet. So
and your staff and your rod will comfort.
Your staff, and so there's this sense of comfort too. The Hebrew yenachamuni, they will comfort me. So yes, so you have comfort here and you have death in here. So certainly you have that connection, right? And so therefore, is there a hopeful sense to this psalm?
Yes.
That I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Right. So that could, for the rabbis, that could be in this life and also in the world to come when we die. Our soul will be with God. So it's a comfort both for those alive, the mourner reciting this psalm, and also for the soul of the deceased for whom the mourner is mourning. That don't worry, yes, so-and-so has just passed, but their soul is with God. Okay, so there's a lot of comfort here. There's a sense that if it's David writing the psalm, perhaps it's a moment before battle, recognizing that life is short and his life could end. It's fear that is expressed in this psalm and dependency. So yes, life is fearful, frightening, and we need help to be guided on the path. And we look to God for that help. We look for God for that support. What is the image of the staff and the rod? How do staffs and rods comfort?
Power. I mean,
power to do.
Okay, so staff and rod could be, we could first think about power. How do we think about power with staff and rod? I'm just asking. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
The shepherd has a staff.
the shepherd has a staff. How is that power, though?
Well, if the shepherd is the one that's guiding all these people,
Yes.
all these sheep that don't know where they're going, right?
Okay.
They see the staff, they know that is the shepherd.
And what kind of staff is it that a shepherd has? There's a special word for the shepherd's staff that has the curved end to it. It's a crook. The shepherd's crook. So the staff and the rod, yeah, so it's like, if somebody's on stage, somebody off stage could be pulling them off with that, but that's a shepherd's crook. So it's pretty long, and no matter where the shepherd is, he can reach out pretty far and kind of grab the sheep and pull it back in line. Okay, but Julian, you mentioned power with a staff. So what came to your mind with power?
I just think, he's standing there with a staff and a rod, and he wields all the power where he's at. I mean.
Okay, but so what I'm thinking of more so with the staff is that what comes to mind with the staff is Moses' staff outstretched over the sea. And so God has Moses use the staff for power to express to Pharaoh some of the signs and wonders were expressed through the staff. And Moses used this staff several times throughout the wandering in the desert in order to cause miracles to happen. He's supposed to hit the rock to get water to come out of it. He doesn't hit the rock with his hand. He uses his staff to hit it. And the staff is stretched over the sea, like I said, and there are other places that there's. So that's what I was thinking of when you said power. I thought of that staff. Yes, Peggy?
Well, to me, it's if you're leading a group and you hold the staff, they have a point to follow.
Okay.
Leader.
Right. So you think of tour guides. No matter where around the world, if you've been to places where there are tour guides, some of them have a flag on top of it or something that they're waving so that the group, especially in a crowded area, can look for that sign and know where to go. Okay, so sheep possibly are trained to be looking for the shepherd's staff so that they know, okay, I'm going to go off here and eat this grass, and every now and then I'll look up and make sure I see that staff.
They panic in a group, say,
Okay.
crossing
The sea.
Red Sea.
Right.
They might feel they got lost, but they see something.
Right. So the staff also brings the people. It's a focal point, so that people can focus there, and so don't worry about getting lost. Okay. So all these, these images so far, staff, rod. So how is it a comfort to have a staff? So the staff and rod are helpful for the shepherd to bring everybody in line. The staff is possibly powerful. How is it comforting? Your staff and your rod comfort me.
Well,
Being
it's
together,
How is it? What do you mean being together?
bringing your people, your group all together.
So when the staff is used to bring people together, is comfort.
Because you're not alone.
So you're not alone because the staff is used to bring you and your fellow sheep together. Okay, Saul.
well, it's a sign to the group. In other words, like if they looked around and they didn't see the staff, they might think.
So you might panic.
Leaving.
Okay, so if you see the staff, then you're not panicking. You're comforted. Everything's okay.
The status quo.
Okay, and what else? Any other thoughts about how the staff and the rod can be comforting?
When they say rod, what do they mean?
So that's a question. We're going to get to that in a second because I have another idea.
It's like a symbol of a leader of God.
Okay, so it could be a scepter. It could be a scepter. I'll give me a little bit of moment because I just want to make sure we unpack this in this traditional way. But if it's a scepter, it's a king. The king for his, the king or queen for their subjects is the same as a shepherd and the sheep. That, in other words, several leaders of Israel were shepherds first. So Moses, after he left Egypt, was a shepherd to his father-in-law's flocks. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were shepherds. Moses, so like I said, Moses was a shepherd, and King David was a shepherd in his youth. So the people who are the leaders of the people of Israel in our history were all shepherds. So there's something to that about this characteristic of leaders of the people of Israel, that the kings should be like shepherds. Okay, so just as a shepherd isn't going to wantonly kill their sheep, because then they would lose their livelihood, and in fact do the opposite, take care of them, lead them to water, lead them to make sure that they're satisfied and that they're thriving in all ways. That's what a king should do. Okay, so there is that image of the shepherd here. So when David is referring to God as a shepherd here, then that's another image of God that we have that we can add to the list of creator, lawgiver, warrior. Here, God is a very calm, pastoral shepherd. Okay, so all these images. Now, what is this rod? Okay, this rod and staff. So, shiftecha umishantecha. So the shevet, a shevet, that's if you look at the Hebrew word, it says shiftecha. The cha is a suffix which means your. So drop the cha, you get the three-letter root of what the word is, shevet. They're just different vowels, but that's just for grammatical purposes. Shevet is tribe, right? The 12 tribes of Israel are the 12 Shevatim. So shevet is a tribe, but it's also could be a scepter. It could be a rod of some kind or staff. And a mishantecha is u mishantecha. So u in front of a word means and. Cha is a suffix that means your. So and your mishenet. You look up in the classic BDB Briggs. Now I forget the three names. Driver Briggs, but I forget the first B. BDB Dictionary of Biblical Hebrew. A mishenet is a walking stick or a support staff, that kind of thing. So it's translated here as rod, but it can. What comes to mind is the shepherd's rod, but it can also be a cane. So now, if it's a cane, the shepherd is walking with a cane. Does this change our understanding of this psalm in any way?
But didn't most people then when they were walking hills, use a walking stick?
Okay, so yes, so the dictionary does also say walking stick for it. So walking stick, okay, people who are not physically disabled will use a walking stick just for better. You see mountain goats barely able to are nimbly able to climb mountains. And there's no way a person can go where a mountain goat goes. So you need a walking stick for extra support that way. Okay, so granted, it could be understood as just a walking stick because sheep will go on mountains where the footing is not so steady, and the shepherd will need extra steady footing, and so would need a walking stick. But let's carry it one step further than a walking stick. What would this be because it is certainly, according to Dr. Ora Horn-Prauser, who is a Bible professor, you could translate this as cane. So what would it be if the shepherd needed a cane, and not all the time, and not just a walking stick for the walking up and down the hills?
Either
Needed.
elderly.
So a person, it could be an elderly shepherd, or
Needs a knee replacement.
needs a knee replacement. Yeah.
I don't want to throw you off, but
Yep.
I've seen a lot of old films going back to like when they made films.
Yes.
And you always see the aristocracy
Yes.
walking with a cane, and it's not necessarily because their knees hurt. It was like at least in Europe.
You have a fancy walking stick.
Right.
Yes, it's part of the attire.
And
Yes.
it was the only thing I saw was like it was only the leaders of the country that were doing it. You didn't see people in the
Okay.
streets.
So let's bring in a legitimate point that yes, a walking stick could carry with it for the nobility and aristocracy as just another sign that they are of that class,
Right.
and that
Protection.
yeah, you could use it to hit somebody, right, when you're walking through a crowd.
An animal attacking you. Or
Right, right. But yeah, I'm thinking of a walking stick as somebody dressed in white coat and tails, right?
This is God.
What?
This is God has arrived.
So this is
like sovereign.
right. So God is absolutely God is sovereign, has a scepter, some other kind. I'm agreeing with you. But I'm just saying, for Dr. Ora Horn-Prauser, the word mishenet is also a cane. And so since this psalm is used mostly and most popularly as a comfort in a time of mourning, and you would think that a mourner would want something solid and with a good foundation to hold on to provide the comfort, something more powerful than the mourner feels that they are themselves at that time, very powerless. What would the image of a cane do to that need for comfort? Is that a helpful image? Does that throw this whole psalm off to see that God is walking with a cane?
Or handing it to you.
Or handing it to you. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Maybe it's a comfort because God's handing it to you so you can hold on to it. Maybe you're footing. Okay, that's a very nice thought. That perhaps we like the only thing is a sheep, perhaps a young sheep is kind of shaky on the path, and that the sheep needs a little bit of support. Maybe the sheep is paying attention to grass and not paying attention to the cliff right there, and the shepherd sees at the last second and pulls the sheep back. So perhaps we, like this unsteady sheep about to fall off the edge of the cliff, need this support too. So that's one way of understanding this cane. This cane, God is handing you the cane so that you can have support. But what if God isn't handing you the cane? What if God is actually walking with the cane? And you see God with the cane and you say, your rod, your staff, they comfort me. How would an image of God walking with a cane be comforting? God's not handing you the cane to hold on to.
Well, you're talking to somebody who just lost
yes.
a loved one.
Right?
And you're thinking, he's telling you, I'm going to help you get through this, to stand, not to collapse, but to
right?
be strong.
I'm going to help you be strong. Absolutely. So yes, we want to hear that from God, that God's saying to us, we want you to be strong. But what if God is walking with a cane while talking to you?
Back disabled.
Right, so how is that a comfort?
Well, perhaps it's you understand my pain.
You understand my pain. So Susan Rubenstein, who is watching, says, comfort comes from the one who is holding the cane, being one who may be a sign of wisdom that comes from the life of an elder who has lived a life of spiritual struggle and growth. So that's along the lines, she said it a little bit more eloquently than I would have, along the lines of what I was thinking of. Let's say I know that when I first was a rabbi at 27 years old, and I still remember the comment when I went for my interview in Lowell, Massachusetts, where somebody said, I have cufflinks older than him, that how can a 27-year-old be a comfort to someone who has just experienced a loss? Here I am, a young whippersnapper, and I have to provide comfort to people who have just experienced a loss when I'm just married and I have 2 kids in that other congregation, not at 27, but by the time after 5 years there. How is that kind of person able to provide comfort? It doesn't seem initially that what does the young person have to provide comfort for somebody older in life who just experienced a loss? That perhaps if someone who is in mourning sees somebody walking with a cane, perhaps that image can be a comforting one to know that person has been through something.
So this cane is old, not cane is disabled.
So, but either way, that the person needs the cane for support. And that support, so that person has been injured, has had a knee replacement, so it's not an injury, it's just the part wore out. Or some other reason, some other kind of something happened in that person's life that person needs an assistance in walking. And that the person didn't just give up and sit down or stay at home. The person said, I'm still going out and doing, and I can function well, and I can even still be a shepherd, but I have my cane here to help me. And that perhaps as a mourner, you see somebody else limping along, and they're trying to provide you comfort. You say, you know what? Maybe there is something to this. I am limping in my emotional way because I've just lost someone, and that person I see physically has a cane, but maybe that's a metaphor that they found a way to be able to keep on walking. And that even though, so I need my emotional cane to be able to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And perhaps that then kind of adds to this image of this comfort. That, and that if God, so it might not seem like a natural kind of idea that God should be limping, that God should be injured in some way. But perhaps God projects God's self to the mourner as injured, but still surviving in order to provide the comfort to the mourner. More thoughts or comments about this?
I still see it my way.
Yeah, okay.
Because, you see Pharaoh, you're
Yes.
depicted in movies, but he has a
Yes,
rod.
absolutely.
And so this is the leader.
Right.
So that leader, when I see that leader with the stick, where
Right.
you see Moses at the Red Sea with the stick, you say, that's the leader. And
Right.
I feel comfortable, and I'll
Right.
follow that person.
I'm not denying, I absolutely would not deny anyone's understanding of a psalm. I'm not denying that. And that, so again, what Saul is saying, for those who couldn't hear, is that, you picture Pharaoh with a scepter. You picture kings with a scepter. It's a sign of leadership, and that's a comforting thought to know that the leader has your back. Okay, and absolutely, you can see that coming out of this psalm. Marie.
So even as part and parcel with the rod and the staff,
Yeah.
Or cane, the shepherd himself is not a king. It's actually a very lowly position.
Uh-huh.
And the boundaries generally probably would not have been marked by fences at that time. So the shepherd would have had to find the verdant fields.
Okay.
And find the calm waters.
Right.
And know his territory and protect sheep that might have wandered off. and
Right.
make sure they don't.
Right.
So, basically, he's got all the equipment of a he doesn't have a bow and arrow, he doesn't
Right.
have a gun.
Right.
But he's got all the equipment that somebody who's really in a position, a disabled position, he's not a king, he doesn't have an army.
Right.
He's completely capably guiding a flock.
Right.
To do what it's supposed to do and keep it on its path.
Right.
And bring it home.
Right. So Maria's describing everything that a shepherd does to who does not have an army, does not have a weapon, as depicted in this psalm, but still is able to lead the sheep to the water. The only thing I would say is the poem begins with, "The Lord is my shepherd." Okay, so it's clear from the very start that the psalmist is going to be using now imagery of shepherd, sheep, pasture, grazing, all of that to life. Okay?
He's completely capable, whatever his state is.
Who is capable?
The shepherd.
The shepherd is capable, right. But so again, so the psalmist here is not picturing God as creator. The Lord is my creator, I shall not want. The Lord is my warrior, I shall not want. The Lord is my lawgiver, I shall not want. He could have, the psalmist could have used any of those imagery, right? The Lord is my healer, my parent, I shall not want. But here it's the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So for some reason, this image is providing the comfort that either King David needs or the author of the psalm needs, ascribing it to David, and using that image as a powerful one. So the shepherd guiding the flock through in the hills, protecting it just with the rod and the staff. And I'm just carrying that imagery forward an extra level based on what Dr. Prauser suggested. That wouldn't it be fascinating to picture the shepherd as lame? And that just going with that theme, that it's open territory there. So, and now the shepherd is even subject to attack, and being lame would not be as quick to counter the attack as someone more typically able. So that despite that, it's still a comfort to the sheep who is the person writing the poem. Yeah, go ahead.
And that would be consistent. He's not a king. The most capable person who wouldn't be lame would be in the military, would be a king, who would be in a different position. Not that every shepherd has to be lame, but a shepherd is a very lowly position. They're not in a position to build themselves.
Okay, so a shepherd is a lonely position too, and that certainly was the case in the Torah when Joseph told the brothers, "Don't tell them don't tell Pharaoh that you're shepherds, because that's a lowly position in Egypt." So it depends on which culture it is. In some cultures, Bedouin culture, that's just what you are. Yeah, everybody is a shepherd, and your status is based on how many sheep you own. The more sheep you own, the wealthier you are. So it depends on the culture. But it's a common image for the Middle East. So anybody from the Middle East would understand this. And anybody who's been to Israel would understand this. It's not so common anymore in Israel. But I still remember in the 70s and the 80s, you travel outside of the big city, you'll frequently be stopped in your car by some kid shepherding his flock across the road. Whether it's 10 goats or 10 sheep crossing the road, it was a common sight in Israel until 20, 30 years ago. Not so common anymore because there are just more roads built in Israel today than there were 20, 30 years ago. But it's still a common sight in the Middle East. I'm sure in the Arab countries in the Middle East, it's a very common sight to see people crossing the road. This kid with a staff leading the sheep quickly or not so quickly across the road. It's in India also. So in many countries in the Middle East and in the Far East, it is still a powerful image. So that when you're reading this psalm, already things are popping into your head. For us, I mean, we're used to it because we've been to funerals, we know this psalm. Okay, or we've been to the memorial service on the holidays, Yizkor, and we're reciting the psalm. So at least we're used to it because we read a lot. But how many times have we seen shepherds guiding their flock? Yeah.
I think of it as the word shepherd as a guider, and that is the image of God, that we don't really think of a person with a staff. We think of God is going to guide us through this, get us
Yes,
through this.
absolutely, Peggy. We see this as God guiding us through, and that's how we're supposed to understand. It's supposed to be a metaphor, absolutely. But the psalmist chose God is my shepherd specifically because the psalmist knew that whoever was going to read this would understand immediately what he's talking about.
Well, we're talking about a time when there were no cars.
No, right,
You know,
right. I'm saying even today.
And
Yes.
if you wanted to think of a guide of some sort,
Right.
you would think of a shepherd.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So, and again, so that we're supposed to understand this metaphorically, and though we see the shepherd as the person in power guiding the flock, I'm just suggesting, based on Dr. Prauser, wouldn't it be just as powerful to see the shepherd as needing a cane in order to do his job, his or her job? And that because the psalm is understood in a mourning, grieving mindset, that perhaps then it's necessary, no, not necessary, but more powerful to know that the shepherd is lame because you, the mourner, are now emotionally lame and you see the person's physical disability as a comfort. That person with a physical disability is able to be a shepherd, able to guide the flock, able to guide you because they've been through something, and perhaps you can learn something from that shepherd because of the injury or the disability that the shepherd has. So I wanted to stop here. I kind of thought I wanted to begin this topic of God with a disability with this psalm to try to then have us think about this idea that turning this concept on its head, that we picture God in these powerful images: creator, lawgiver, warrior, sovereign of the universe. Now, can we flip the script and picture God as injured in this psalm, perhaps, or with a natural physical disability? And then let's think for next week, and I'll give you some other texts from other places in the Torah. What not just physical disability, but intellectual disability as well. To try to think about that. What kind of is that a powerful image? Is it a useful image to think about God with a disability? Yes, Peggy.
They say God created man in his image. There is a lot of different physical disabilities that people have. And is that God, image?
Right. So yes, absolutely. Mostly when we people in the disability community, those with disabilities, those who are advocates for people with disabilities, always refer to we're all created in God's image. And so to say that there's a bit of God in all of us. But nobody has said before, well, we're creating God's image because that means that God is disabled too. Nobody has said that before, okay, until I heard it from Dr. Prauser, okay?
But God has some type of disability.
Yes.
How much more powerful?
Right.
Because he has to be to still be able to lead his.
As Barbara is saying, if God has a disability, how much more powerful God must be to overcome that disability to be able to be sovereign of the universe. So I want us to think about that thought. That's a perfect place to end this discussion tonight, as I'll present some texts next week to kind of highlight this idea. And so have a good night, everybody, and we'll continue next
Thank you
week.
very much.